I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all about the hybrid. I actually was almost late, and believe it or not, I was on time just taking a call while I waited for everybody to get here. But the reason I almost was late was I was actually just on a panel talking about the threat to collective bargaining around the country. And it was sort of nice to be on that panel and then thinking about coming here where we could talk about one of the fruits of collective bargaining. So as imperfect as all of this is, when I think about our brothers and sisters in Wisconsin or almost in Ohio and some of the things that have happened in 14 other states, it's good to be here and not to be there. So the hybrid. I'm going to start, and forgive me for those of you that this may seem too elemental, but I'm going to start with a little bit about the essence of pension plans and the difference between the types of pension plans, because I think it's helpful to understand that issue as we move forward and talk about the hybrid. So there are two major kinds of pension plans. There's what they call defined benefit and defined contribution. From the trade union point of view, one of them is a real pension plan, and one of them is really a 401k plan. Okay, the ARP that you all are in is essentially a 401k plan, meaning that the employer makes contributions, some set of contributions for you, but takes no responsibility whatsoever for what your ultimate pension benefit will be. If you invest the money, the employer invests the money, you invest it, then you control where the investments go, and you either do very well or very poorly, depending on how good an investor you are and how lucky you are and what the general state of the economy is when you get around towards retirement. Whatever happens, happens. That's the essence of a defined contribution plan. In that circumstance, the employer bears no risk at all in terms of the intent of the pension plan is to provide you with a comfortable, fair retirement based upon your service as an employee, but the employer bears no risk of whether or not the amount of money will be sufficient to provide such a retirement. You could do great, you could do lousy. And those of you who have friends maybe who retired in 2007 before the great stock market crash know how different life felt in 2007 than it felt in 2009, even though they may have invested identically, taken the same risks, et cetera, et cetera. Just luck, just the timing when you turn whatever age you decide to retire. Those kind of things matter. The employer has no risk. The other kind of pension plan, a defined benefit plan, is a more traditional pension plan, what we think of as a pension plan. Defined benefit means just what it sounds like. There's a certain contribution made by you, which could be 0 in Tier 2, up to 2% in Tier 2A, and as you'll hear in the hybrid, up to 5%. But you make a certain contribution. The employer's contribution is completely not predetermined. What is predetermined for the employer is the benefit formula and an estimate of its ultimate liability, and then the employer makes a series of contributions along the way that are supposed to be enough to fund your pension. And in a defined pension plan, all the risk of how well those investments do is on the employer. None of it is on the employee. So if the stock market does great for a series of years, then the fund may get technically overfunded. If it does poorly for a series of years or bad investment decisions are made, the plan may get technically underfunded. But as far as what your benefit is concerned as a beneficiary, it's already preset. And you take none of the risk. Okay? So there's a huge difference in terms of that. Those two types of plans. Now, most people then think that trade unions go on and say that means that all defined contribution plans are bad and all defined benefit plans are good, and we're here to tell you no matter who you are or what you're doing, if you got a chance to get into a defined benefit plan, go ahead and do it. That's not right. And a big part of why we created the hybrid probably only affects a tiny number of people in this room because it's new employees, but a big part of why we created the hybrid is this. In those circumstances where employees are given the choice between these two 180-degree different plans, between a defined benefit plan, like what we call SERS in Connecticut, that's our defined benefit plan, and a defined contribution plan, like we call ARP, these totally radically different pension plans, they are forced under IRS law to make that decision when they are hired. It's an irrevocable, one-time choice. Which plan do you want? That's the normal IRS law. And why is that such a bad thing? Well, it's a bad thing because in general, if you get hired when you're 25 years old, you don't know a damn thing about anything, right? None of us knew anything when we were 25. But it's particularly bad for this reason. Defined benefit plans are skewed in favor of career employees. They are designed for career employees. They're not well designed for people who are not career employees. And if you want to understand that, I can give you a simple example. But let's start with this. How do you figure out what your benefit's going to be in a defined benefit plan? Well, typically it's a simple multiplication problem. It's your number of years of service times some mathematical constant times your final average earnings. Your number of years of service times your final average earnings times some mathematical constant. In Connecticut, this is interesting, this thing's actually falling on me. Okay. In Connecticut, in Tier 2, that mathematical constant is about 1.5. That is, you earn 1.5% multiplied by your final average earnings, multiplied by your number of years of service, and that's going to tell you what your pension is going to be. Okay? That's the simple mathematical formula. So, as you'll hear in a minute, it's a little more complicated in Connecticut because we have this thing called a Tier 2 breakpoint, which makes your hair fall out. But leaving that aside, it's a simple multiplication problem. One of those factors in the multiplication problem is your final average earnings. Okay? It's a huge factor because it's one of the three factors that you multiply. And your final average earnings is set when you leave your employer's employment. Not when you actually are ready to retire, but when you leave that particular employer's employment, in this case, the state of Connecticut. All right? So say I am I'm going to work 10 years for the state of Connecticut and 20 years for the University of Alaska. 2 employees, all right? They're identical in every way. They're both eventually going to retire as full professors, and they are both going to work 30 years total in higher ed, 10 years for the state of Connecticut, and 20 years for the University of Alaska, okay? One employee works for Connecticut his first 10 years, and then 20 years in Alaska, and the other employee works for Connecticut his last 10 years. First he worked 20 years in Alaska, and now he worked his last 10 years in Connecticut, okay? So take that formula. They both have 10 years of service for the state of Connecticut, right, when they retire, okay? They both, let us presume, had very similar careers. They're both multiplying by that 1.5%, which is, except for the Tier 2 breakpoint, that constant. And they are both multiplying by their final average earnings. Well, if I started in the University of Alaska 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and now I came for my last 10 years to the University of Connecticut, and I retire as a full professor, my final average earnings are my full professor's salary in Connecticut right now. I don't know what it is, but for this, Southern, I don't know what exactly it is, but let's say it's $120,000 a year. Okay? So you're doing this math and you're multiplying $120,000 a year, 1.5%, 10 years of service, that's 15%, times $120,000 a year. My pension from the state of Connecticut, just for those 10 years of service, is something like $16,000 a year. Okay? Now I'm the other person. I started 30 years ago for Connecticut. I did 10 years and I went to University of Alaska. Well, I got the same 1.5%, I got the same 10 years, so it's 15% times my final average earnings. What are my final average earnings? They're what I was earning for the state of Connecticut 20 years ago. I probably wasn't a full professor yet, so I was maybe, I don't know, what was I, assistant? So first of all, I wasn't even in as high a position, but second of all, I was working off of 1990 salaries, not 2012 salaries. So maybe I was making, what, 40,000? That sound like a good guess? Mm-hmm. Something like that? So now my pension's 15% of 40,000. Okay, I think that's what? 15 times 4, that's $6,000 a year. Okay, instead of 16,000, it's 6,000. I'm the same guy, basically, identical. It's just that I happen to retire directly and go into retirement from Connecticut towards the end of my career instead of starting Connecticut at the beginning of my career. All that is a really long way of saying that if you know when you start from the state of Connecticut that you're going to be here 3, 4, 5, 8, 10 years and then leave and go somewhere else, it might very well be that you're better off in the ARP. Better than the CSRS, even with all of our criticism of the ARP, because of this prejudice in defined benefit plans for people who have a career here, or in particular people who retire from here or leave state service just before retirement. So you might be better off if you knew that when you were that 25-year-old kid that you were only going to be here 3, 4, 5 years, or if you knew you weren't going to get tenure, or you knew your spouse was going to move to Alaska, and so, well, what the heck, you're going to go with him or her to Alaska, right? On the other hand, if you knew you were going to be here 30 years, I would submit your choice is almost certainly better off to be in the defined benefit plan.
The certainty of a decent retirement. A 30-year pension with the state of Connecticut, $120,000 a year at 1.5%. That's about 45% of $120,000 a year guaranteed for the rest of your life. With, by the way, cost of living increases. So I would say it's a no-brainer. Don't join the ARP. Take the CERS. Okay, now you're this 25-year-old person. How the hell are you supposed to know which one to pick? Think about what you knew about your life when you were 25 years old, and you're making an irrevocable choice about one of the most significant issues in your life, based upon a prediction of your employment over the next 30 years. It's insane. But that's what the law requires. So a big reason we created the hybrid plan is for that 25-year-old. Okay? Who started in the state of Connecticut July 2nd, 2011, is told, hey, which plan you want to be in, CERS or the ARP, and is sitting there correctly, completely confused. The hybrid plan says, here's a way to hedge your bets. You can have the certainty of the CERS plan because its benefits are its benefits in its defined benefit aspect, because it's a hybrid of a defined benefit and defined contribution. You can have the certainty of the CERS plan because your benefits are identical. If you're here 30 years from now and you leave, you're going to get exactly the same pension as your brother or sister who chose the regular CERS plan. If you choose the hybrid, same benefits. But when you retire, you also have the choice of a defined contribution aspect. Okay? And the defined contribution aspect says that you're going to be able to get all of your contributions back, all of your employer's contributions back, and 4% interest. Now, is that better than a defined benefit, or is it worse? The answer is, it depends on how long you stay. If you left after only 5 years, you're way better off with the defined contribution aspect. You're not going to leave your money in there. You left it there when you're 30 years old. You're going to retire when you're 65. Whatever your final average earnings are 35 years old. They're a joke. You're much better off just taking your 4%, your 5% contribution, the employer's 5%, and the interest you've earned. But if you're here 30, 25, 30, 35 years, you're going to be much happier with your defined benefit. So this gives you the choice. It gives you the ability to hedge your bets. And so I would say to almost any 25-year-old, unless you have a crystal ball, take the hybrid. Because it's the only way to prevent yourself from having to make this impossible choice between a defined contribution plan and a defined benefit plan when you are way too young to be able to make that choice. And when the circumstances haven't, it's not that you're uneducated, it's the things haven't happened that would allow you to make the choice intelligently. In effect, the hybrid plan allows you to make the choice when you know all the information, which is when you're ready to leave, instead of when you're hired. So does that make sense to everybody why we created the plan? Okay. And now, what does that have to do with everybody here, most of whom I'm guessing are not 25 years old, you're 26 like me, and have been here a while. And so the issue is, you've been in the ARP plan, and how does the hybrid plan help you? Well, the other thing about the hybrid plan that's kind of neat is it's a new option. And you remember what I said about the IRS. They said you have a one-time irrevocable choice of pension plans, which is a terrible law, but that's what the law is. Well, that one-time irrevocable choice is among options that were available when you made the choice. So they can hold you to not having chosen CERS. Leaving aside the SAG award, which I'll touch on in a second, they can hold you and say, well, you chose ARP, you had your one-time shot, sorry, you can't move to CERS. But they can't hold you to 20 years ago you didn't choose the hybrid plan, because there wasn't any such thing. So by creating the hybrid plan, we make it clear, as far as the IRS is concerned, that all of you folks who are in the ARP have the ability to move, and have the ability to move with some form of past service. So that's the other nice thing about the hybrid. Now, you all know that ultimately, you all now have, if you're in the ARP, you have three choices. You have the hybrid, if you want to move to the hybrid. You can stay in the ARP if you want to stay in the ARP. Or you can move into the SAG award when and if the IRS rules on the SAG. Well, they'll rule at some point. So I shouldn't say when and if. Whenever they finally rule on the SAG award. The SAG award, as you guys know, was our effort to fix an injustice that was done to everybody in higher ed. It was great. You all were offered the opportunity to choose between defined contribution and a defined benefit plan, the ARP and the CERS. It's great that you had that choice. But in fact, two things were wrong. One was, many of you didn't really have that choice. They told you only about the ARP, particularly people who were under grant programs and various other things were sort of directly
forced into the ARP, whether they liked it or not. But even those of you who were given the honest choice were not given the information necessary to make the decision intelligently. So for that reason, we filed a grievance, and we prevailed in that grievance, and we got the SAG award. And the SAG award isn't perfect. You know, what we wanted in the grievance, by the way, was for you not to have to buy past service at the full actuarial cost, but to be given the past service at the cost it would have been if you were in CSRS all along. And we couldn't get that. It would have been a huge expense for the state of Connecticut. We couldn't get that. But we got, you know, what we consider a victory, but we don't know if the IRS agrees. We don't know if the IRS will say to us, look, I know it's normally an irrevocable choice, but we will allow you to provide this one-time additional choice because of what you established in litigation about the two things I said. Some were forced, and even if you weren't forced, you didn't have the right information. Or will they say, no, tough luck, you had it once, and you know, you made your choice once, and that's what the law says. You know, we're counting on the intelligence and humanity of the IRS. That's all I can say. So that means that you all have these three choices, one of which may or may not be real, right? One, the IRS may or may not allow you to do it. Two of which are certainly real. You can choose the ARP or you can choose the hybrid. And so what we did negotiate was that at least you won't have to make that choice until we know what the IRS says. So the window is now open. You can make the decision tomorrow if you want to choose the hybrid. But if you're still wondering whether you should choose the SAG award instead, you don't have, the window will not close until 90 days following the IRS's ruling on the SAG award, which could be 2 years, who knows? Okay, so you have 90, it could be 90 days from tomorrow. Well, they won't go on a Saturday. It could be 90 days from Monday, or it could be 90 days from 3 years from now. Okay, so there's that window. I saw a question back there, but let me just finish a couple things and then we'll take questions. Steve always has these things he makes me promise I won't forget to cover. So if I start taking questions, I might screw it up. Normally I'm perfect in every way, but once I screwed up. Okay, so we covered the SAG award and its purpose and some of its problems and the hybrid, et cetera, et cetera. So what are the differences, the straight out differences between the hybrid and the SAG award? Assuming that that's what you're choosing between. You now know a lot about the difference between the hybrid and the ARP, right? Spent maybe too long talking about that. But what's the difference between the hybrid and the SAG award? So really, really very few differences, okay? On the CSRS benefit side, on the benefit aspect of the hybrid award, as I said, they are identical. That is, you're going to get a defined benefit pension under the hybrid. If that's what you choose, it's the same defined benefit pension that you would have had if you chose CSRS. Okay, so that's clearly an equality. The benefit of the hybrid is you get this choice if you don't like the defined benefit that you would have gotten, and you'd rather have your contributions returned and your employer's contributions returned and, or not returned, I guess added, your contributions returned, the employer's contributions added, and 4% interest since they were made, you have that choice under the hybrid. You don't have it under CSRS. And that's particularly important for a couple of reasons that I'll cover in a second. So that's the upside of the hybrid, right? There's only one downside of the hybrid. And it's simple, but it's real. You pay 3% more every year you're working for the state of Connecticut. Going forward, once you switch, you pay 3% more than you would have paid under the equivalent CSRS tier. 3% more than you would have paid. Okay, so if you would have been a Tier 2A CSRS employee, meaning that you were hired after July 1, 1997, you would have paid 2% under CSRS, so you pay 2 plus 3 or 5% under the hybrid. That's the downside, 3% more. If you would have been a Tier 2 employee hired before 1997, you would have paid 0% in Tier 2 under CSRS, so you're going to pay 0 plus 3, which is 5% under the hybrid. Now, there's just a glitch connected to that. 0 plus 3, that was good. 0 plus 3 is 5. Like that, I was checking all your mathematical ability and you all come. 0 plus 3 is, of course, 3, but I was a step ahead of myself. You pay 3% under the Sears, the Tier 2 hybrid, 0 plus 3. Okay. However, because of another goofy IRS rule, which says that when you switch from one pension plan to another, it can't lower the employee contribution, we can't let you pay 3%. We have to charge you 5%. So what we do is you pay 3% into the hybrid, and then the other 2% you pay yourself by putting it into the ARP. I know that's goofy, but that's the only way we can satisfy the IRS. So does everybody understand what I'm saying?
if you were hired before July 1, 1997, and you make the switch into the hybrid, you're going to pay 3% into the hybrid plan for each future year of service, and you're going to pay 2% to yourself, meaning into your ARPA. And that's the only way we can make the IRS happy. Okay? So that's the downside of a hybrid. You're paying 3% more than you would have been if you were in the equivalent surge tier. All right? So one particular way that that's important, however, applies to those of you who buy past service. And that's because when you buy past service, you're spending money that partially is derived from your own contributions and partially is derived from the employer's contributions, right? You put in 5, the employer puts in 8, so 5/13 of the money in your ARP account are derived from your contributions, and 8/13 of the money in your ARP account are derived from the employer's contributions. Because I'm just distributing interest equally among those two groups, right? Okay. One of the problems that the SERS plan has is for those people who are unfortunate enough to pass away with fewer than 25 years of service and before they are retirement eligible. Okay? So if you are not retirement eligible when you pass away and you don't have 25 years of service, you don't get a defined benefit under the SERS plan. Under the rules of the SERS plan, which we've been wanting to change for 30 years but haven't succeeded, what you get is what's called the pre-retirement death benefit. And the technical legal definition of the pre-retirement death benefit is BUCCUS. Okay? See if you guys know that word, but that's nothing. You do not get any of the benefit of the employer's contributions. All you get back is your own contributions. Well, you wouldn't get anything because we're talking about you having passed away. But your beneficiary only gets your contributions back. It's nothing from the employer. It's a terrible,
The buckets.
Yeah, that's kicking the buckets. Yeah, exactly. So typically what state employees who are SERS covered do is they buy life insurance, supplemental life insurance for themselves. They buy extra to cover them during the years until they have 25 years of service or they are retirement eligible. So that way they're dependent, their beneficiary comes out okay. What does that mean for all you guys? Well, when we were talking about the SAG award, and people were saying to me, well, what happens if I put in $300,000, move $300,000 and buys me less than 25 years of service, so I don't have 25 years, and I'm not old enough to be retirement eligible, and then I'm unfortunate enough to die the next week. Okay, I'm hit by a comet. I always use hit by a comet. I don't know why. So I'm hit by a comet the next week. Now the pension fund just got $300,000 out of my ARP account, right? And I'm hit by a comet, and all my beneficiary gets is these pre-retirement death benefits. Well, the pre-retirement death benefits are 5/13 of that $300,000, because that's how much is attributable to your contributions. So your beneficiary just lost 8/13 of $300,000, which I think is $240,000. Is that right? No, I don't know. Whatever it is, no, it's not that much. But it's a lot of money. I think it's like $200,000. It's a lot of money. And so one of the things we said to people when we were talking about the SAG award is that we had required that the state of Connecticut reopen the life insurance purchase capability so that if you chose to buy fewer than 25 years and you were not yet retirement eligible and you wanted to cover your beneficiary because you actually liked your beneficiary, you could handle it through life insurance because the SERS program doesn't do it. As compared to, say, the ARP program, where when you die, it doesn't matter how old you are, no matter how many years of service you are, your beneficiary's got your ARP money, right? So that was what we did with SAG. On the hybrid, that's not an issue. Because on the hybrid, as you know, if your defined benefit is no good, you get back your contributions plus your employer's contributions plus 4% interest. So the $300,000 that you put in from your ARP account, your beneficiary would get that back plus 4% interest. If you die the next week, I guess the 4% ain't much. But the $300,000 is a lot of money. So the hybrid actually solves that problem. And it's another reason, by the way, that the IRS likes the hybrid better. So that's a key difference between the hybrid and the SERS plan. Okay, I'll answer purchase issues questions when you guys ask them because everybody always has a million of them. Let me just make sure I cover retiree health care and retroactivity. Okay, retiree health care, we get a lot of questions about this. Does it affect my retiree health care if I switch from ARP to the hybrid? And the answer is no. Okay? Your retiree health care entitlement is based on your years of service for the state, has nothing to do with what pension plan you were in. Okay, so it has no effect. But I always use this opportunity to add one thing which sometimes people forget or were never told. Under no matter what pension plan you retire under, for you to get retiree health care, you must be getting a periodic monthly payment from the state of Connecticut or from something that the state of Connecticut treats as an agent. Okay? So that means, like, let's say you retire under ARP and you got $1 million in your ARP account and you say, I've always wanted to buy $1 million yacht and travel around the world and fish for sturgeon. Okay? You can do it. You can buy your $1 million yacht and fish for sturgeon. I don't know where you do that, but somewhere around the world I'm sure you do. But you just lost your retiree health care because you're not getting any monthly payment from that $1 million. So what we always tell people to make sure to do is, of that $1 million, take at least 10 grand or something sufficient to buy a life annuity for yourself so that you're getting, even if it's $10 a month, that's a periodic monthly payment. That protects your entitlement to retiree health care. Now, if you like your spouse, and your spouse likes you, and you want to cover them, you better get a life annuity for both of you. Because if you predecease your spouse, and the life annuity was only for you, then once again, you're not getting your spouse is not getting a periodic monthly payment from the state of Connecticut, and your spouse just lost her or his retiree health care for life. That is the rule. It's got nothing in particular to do with hybrid. It's the rule under CSRS, although, of course, under CSRS, almost everybody takes that monthly pension, so you don't have to tell them, right? But it's also whether under the hybrid or the ARP. However, whatever the three plans, you must have a periodic monthly payment. Okay. Maybe I will stop there, and I'm going to take, I don't know, am I calling on people, Steve, or someone else? Okay, forgive me, I'm calling on you. I don't know everybody's name, so I'll just go like you. We'll start with him over there, because you had your hand up for a while.
But in terms of buying past year's service,
Yes.
timing is everything in that regard, because when the stock market's doing well, you are making a lot of money in your alternate retirement plan and potentially have the ability to buy all those years of service, and then if the stock market were to take a dump, you may not be able to buy all your years. Is that correct?
Well, yes, in the sense that you can buy your years of service with whatever happens to be in your ARP account. So at that particular point. So we have a lot of people who know for sure that they want to switch, and they're not sure if they want to switch from the hybrid into the SAG, for instance. So they can't make their decision right now. And so what they do is they move all their money into a stable value account, and then you know whatever the stock market does, you know that your money is going to be there with a tiny growth. Not going to grow fast, but it's going to be there, and you can do that. If you're more of a gambler, then you can obviously take your money and put it in whatever you want, in as risky an investment as you want, and you might be able to buy more past service if you're lucky, but you would, of course, be able to buy less past service if you're unlucky. And as I've said before, if you're really, really a gambler, I do represent the dealers, the UAW dealers in Foxwoods, and 32 Black, put it all in 32 Black, and, you can get a lot of past service, or probably none. Yeah, anybody? Let's see, there was a hand over there next, but now it's down, I guess. So, yeah, go ahead.
I had a question. If we switch and say the contract negotiations change in the future, is that going to influence the percentage we use potentially to calculate our pension, or are we locked in at that percentage now in case the contract negotiations change, or the tier 2 breakpoint changes or something like that?
Yeah, well, let me say a couple things. The tier 2 breakpoint will change. So let me explain what the tier 2 breakpoint. Does everybody know what it is? Okay.
Most of them don't.
Hurt your hair. Okay. Tier 2 breakpoint. Over the years, many pension plan defined benefit plans, since their purpose is to provide overall retirement security for people when they retire, generally after career service, have used a different pension multiplier depending upon whether your earnings were above or below the Social Security maximum. The theory is, if they're under the Social Security maximum, you don't need as much pension because you got Social Security. But to the extent your earnings exceed the Social Security maximum, then you need more money because you're not getting any Social Security payments on those earnings. That was the theory that caused a number of defined benefit plans over the years to adopt two different multipliers instead of like just 1.5%. A multiplier for below the Social Security maximum, which is smaller, and a multiplier for above the Social Security maximum, which is higher. So good old Tier 1, which effectively, well, didn't die in 1984, but no new employees were allowed in it. In good old Tier 1, effectively the multiplier is 2% of the money over the Social Security maximum, and it's much, much less of the money below the Social Security maximum. But there was this tricky thing in it. The Social Security maximum was fixed at what it was in like 1950 something. It's $4,800. Okay, so that means this little, the much lower multiplier only applies to the first $4,800 of your earnings. Even if you're in Tier 1 and you retire in 2025, it's still only $4,800, even though obviously the Social Security maximum by then would be whatever, $180,000. I think is it $125 right now? I think it's $125 right now. Okay, so when Tier 2 was being negotiated back in 1981 to be effective by 1984, the state's proposal was that a lower multiplier exists below the Social Security maximum and a higher multiplier exists above the Social Security maximum, and that it not be fixed, because they made the argument that $4,800 was irrational. It shouldn't be fixed. It should go up as something goes up, and they actually proposed the cost of living. And the union said, no, we want it fixed. Just like we did with Tier 1, where it stays at an absurdly low level forever. And as a compromise, this was 1981 when people were looking at inflation rates of what, like 18%, something like that. The unions agreed to 6%. That is, the Tier 2 breakpoint was fixed in 1981. I don't remember exactly at what. It was something reasonable, 20 grand maybe, something, I don't remember. And it would go up 6% every year. And that seemed like, to the unions, like a really good deal, because 6% is way less than what the state wanted. They wanted the cost of living. It was running like 8%. And so for a number of years, that turned out to be a really good decision. 6% was actually lower than the cost of living increases for a number of years in the mid to late 80s and maybe even into the 90s. But at some point, it started to be abandoned. And for a number of years now, the cost of living, of course, has gone up way less than 6%, but the Tier 2 breakpoint keeps going up 6% every year, and that means this lower multiplier in Tier 2 applies to more and more of your salary. Okay? The lower multiplier in Tier 2 is 1 1/3%. So for all of your money, all of your salary below the breakpoint, your multiplier is 1 1/3%. For all of your money above the breakpoint, your multiplier goes up by another 0.5%, so it's 1.8333 repeated. So obviously, the lower the breakpoint, the better off you are. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. And there also is a goofy little cap in there that it can't go up more than the average of the overall. So I can explain it to you, but it's not necessary. In this 6%, there's a cap which we haven't hit yet. There's a reasonable chance we could hit it over the next 4 or 5 years. But what we agreed to in 2011 was to try to fix the Tier 2 breakpoint, this problem that it's going up too fast. And negotiations will be starting sometime early next year to be concluded before July 1, 2013. There's 0.5% of payroll, not out of employees, out of the administration, has set aside 0.5% of payroll to try to adjust the Tier 2 breakpoint. Okay? So the Tier 2 breakpoint will be getting better, which was your question. Now let me ask the more important, not that that wasn't important, but that was the second question, and your real question was, could I buy into CSRS and then have the benefits changed and I get screwed, right? Or buy into the hybrid and have the benefits changed and I get screwed. So let's take that. I can say 2 really important things about that. First of all, it is our position, and we think strongly supported by the federal courts, that you can't change someone's benefits with respect to years of service that they've already earned. And particularly which you have paid for. We've never done that. We've never taken away people's benefits with respect to the years of service that we've always made changes, like Tier 2, for instance, was created for new people. It didn't affect the longer people. And there are, like I said, very strong court cases that suggest that. Even on the COLA, which as you know we did change, the COLA, we both lowered it and increased it. And it'll turn out to be better or worse depending on what the cost of living is. If we go back to years like we had in the 80s and early 90s, the new COLA is actually way better than the old one. I don't know what it's going to do, obviously. I don't have a crystal ball. But anyway, so there's that. And the second thing is, your benefits are fixed in contract until 2022. Okay, so no one is going to change your benefits before 2022 except for you by collective bargaining. I don't think anybody is going to turn around and take away benefits that you've already paid for by agreement. I mean, I can tell you, I'm never going to recommend it. I don't think any union leader is ever going to recommend it. So I can't imagine it happening. What happens after 2022? Is there going to be negotiations? The answer is yes. No question that it's going to be negotiations. And yes, it could affect the benefit formula. I think it's extremely unlikely that it would affect the benefit formula for any years of service that people have already earned, which is, of course, what you're paying for, right? When you buy years of service, you're buying past service, not future service. I think it's unlikely that we would do anything that would affect even future years of service in any noticeably, bad way. But for the past years of service, I mean, we ain't going to agree to it, I'll tell you that. And we have a very good argument that it's illegal even if we did. Yes?
Just a follow-up, Dan. I went to the Gottfried and Somberg presentation in Glastonbury.
That's a private company that, okay.
Yeah, I know. They sent around an email saying that they aren't sanctioned by the state. Their formula was a little bit different than yours. They said 1.33% below the break point and then 0.5% for the difference above the break point in your salary.
Yeah, add the 1.33 plus the half, and you get what I said,
Oh,
1.8333. Yeah. Okay, back there.
Couple of questions. What is the maximum compensation when it comes to calculating the buyout value? Is it everything that you earn in a year, not just your salary?
Okay, so yeah, how do they do the buyout calculation? Ultimately, when you get your pension, they average out your 3 best years of service. That's what ultimately happens to know what your benefit will be when you retire. The buyout percentage is a proxy to try to guess, the actuaries use to try to guess what your final average earnings will be. That proxy requires you to choose your single highest year of service. And it would include all pensionable earnings with a caveat that if there is something anomalous about that year of service, the state and the coalition have agreed that there should be an adjustment. So what is anomalous? Okay, anomalous means something that would make it totally unfair to use that highest year as a reasonable predictor of what your final average earnings will be. Some things that we know are not anomalous, summer school. If you teach courses in the summer, that's not anomalous because nobody can control when you teach courses in summer. You might easily teach them in your final average years. So simply teaching courses in the summer is not anomalous. What was agreed to as an example of something anomalous, okay? I am a full professor, and the president of Southern leaves, and I'm asked to be acting president, okay? Obviously, they think I'm not skilled enough to remain a professor, and the best they can do is make me president. I should, but too easy. At any rate, I get a big raise, right? But I'm acting president. I get a big raise for that 8 months until they finish their search and bring in whoever the heck they bring in. That's an example of something that's clearly anomalous, just not fair to use that as a predictor of what my final average earnings will be, unless I'm about to retire, in which case it would be factored in. But if I'm, 5 years away from retirement, you shouldn't use that year at all. So if you are in that circumstance, if you think your highest year is anomalous, what you do is you get that information to Steve Greatorex. It comes to me, and then it is reviewed by Lydia Almini on the Office of Labor Relations. And if we agree to drop that last year, then it's dropped. Whatever year you think is unfair, it's dropped. If we don't agree, you'll be notified. You'll have a chance to submit additional information, etc. Does that make sense to everybody?
One more question.
Sure.
Let's assume that if there are 2 beneficiaries, you have 2 beneficiaries.
2 beneficiaries. Okay.
And you retire, then you die. If you die, so they start collecting the benefits that they have. Now, if one of those beneficiaries dies, then his share will go to the other beneficiary, or
The question would be, if you're talking about under the hybrid plan, the question would be, what selection do you make when you retire? If you select the defined benefit option, then you're given a choice when you select your defined benefit option. Do you want to purchase a spousal option or not? And the spouse doesn't have to, they call it a spousal option, but you don't have to actually be married to the person. So spousal is kind of misnamed, but it's one person, and your pension is then actuarially adjusted based upon the difference in your age. Okay, if you pick someone, you only have one beneficiary directly as your spousal option. Okay, but if you choose the defined contribution aspect and you take a load of cash, you can have a series of contingent beneficiaries, and that just whether they get money or not depends on who dies first.
and if that beneficiary
Yeah, on a defined benefit aspect, remember, here's what, the defined benefit aspect works like this. In effect, you're gambling when you leave on how long you're going to live. If you knew when you retired, and you can make the decision whether to retire or not, okay, and you knew you were going to get hit by a comet a week later, well, you're not going to say, okay, give me the defined benefit, it's really nice, I get $1,200 a month for the rest of my life. Well, you're going to be dead in a week. So obviously you would choose, if you knew that, you would take the defined contribution aspect. If you knew you're 62 years old when you retire and you know you're going to die at 104, I don't care how much cash they're going to give you. Say, give me the defined benefit plan, because it's going to be gone sooner or later before I hit 104. So the idea of a defined benefit plan is you're covered no matter how long you live. You're not rich, you're not poor. You get a decent standard of living no matter how long you live. Okay, so if you've chosen that and you happen to be unlucky and die in 3 years, and then your beneficiary dies 4 years later, it might have turned out that you would have done better if you took your lump sum. But on the other hand, do you want to be betting against your long life? That's the real problem, right? You get a certain amount of cash, it can be enough for you to live like a king if you know you're going to be dead in 8 months, and it can be enough for you to live like a pauper if you know you're going to live for 35 years. And, most people don't know. Yeah, whatever.
Getting back to the SAG award, if it took the IRS 3 or 4 more years to decide, if you decided you wanted to retire in the meantime, you have to make a choice between hybrid or ARP.
We believe you do. That is, we don't think the IRS would let you choose the hybrid now and then later choose the SAG award. If you stayed with ARP, you might later be able to choose the SAG award. But if you choose the hybrid now, we don't think they would later let you switch. However, it's not as much of a problem as it sounds, because remember, what's the only detriment of the hybrid as compared to the SAG award? There's only one downside.
You're not retirement.
It's only for active employees having to pay 3% more per year. So if you're retiring next month, don't wait for the SAG award. I mean, you should choose the ARP or you should choose the hybrid, but no reason to wait for the SAG award, because it's the same benefits as the hybrid. Does that make sense?
But if you're in the ARP, why would you choose, say, the hybrid? If you didn't know whether the IRS was going to allow you to buy the past service.
Well, again, let's think of it as two categories of employee. Okay, so I've got past service, and I'm trying to decide between the hybrid and the SAG award. I've already decided that I want to stay in ARP. I want the defined benefit aspect. Okay, and I'm trying to decide whether to wait. If I'm going to retire in the very near future, there's no reason to wait. Just choose the hybrid, because, like I said, the only downside is that 3% more you're paying per year, but you're not paying it because you're retired. So no reason to wait if I'm going to retire. If I plan to be here a while longer, I may just, and I'm absolutely certain that I want a defined benefit plan. So I want to hedge my bets with a hybrid. I know I want a defined benefit plan. Under those circumstances, I may decide to wait. Now, what does time do to me? What is my waiting until the SAG award is issued do to me? Well, one thing is whatever happens to your money in the ARP account, of course, affects how much you can buy. So you can be conservative and keep it in a stable value fund, and you know that if the IRS rules in 3 years, you're going to have that amount of money plus an obnoxiously small amount of interest. Okay, or you can be as risky as you want. That's up to you. The other thing you know is you'll be older when 2 years from now you're going to be 2 years older. In general, that lowers the purchase cost. In general, okay, it's not. It lowers the purchase cost for everybody who is essentially already retirement eligible. The longer you wait, the cheaper it is to buy your past service, because the actuaries charmingly assume that the older you are, the sooner you're going to die. I mean, just put it really bluntly, that's what they assume, right? So that's not true of people who are younger than normal retirement age, because the actuaries will assume then that they're actually more likely to retire sooner because they're closer to their normal retirement age, and they're not going to be one of those people unlucky enough to get hit by a comet before they retire. So you can look at yourself and see which of those categories you're in. But if you are in the category, the other way to do it is to cheat up when you do your hybrid calculator. Just effectively lie about your age and your years of service, because obviously 2 years from now you're going to be 2 years older with 2 more years of service, and then compare the two, and you'll see what it does to your purchase cost.
Quick comment about the SAG.
Yes.
If for some reason I were a little suspicious about how well funded hybrid is,
Yes.
is there any objective source I could go to all those?
Yeah.
I mean, I know legally, according to the Constitution, the state is obligated to meet those obligations. But let's say down the road, the
Right.
governor and legislature would have decided to change it.
Yeah. I actually think, believe it or not, that you can count the unions as a pretty objective source on this. We are the ones who actually created the funding requirement for the pension plan to begin with through bargaining back in 1981. Before that, the legislature put in money whenever they felt like it. So actually, we believe strongly in pension funding. We think it's a really good idea. And what I can tell you is this. There are two ways to measure how well funded a pension plan is. The most common one, because it's the easiest for all these national agencies to do, they compare the percentage of money, the amount of total liability of the fund on, in the future based upon all the anticipated years of service of everybody who's currently in the fund and how long they're going to live after they retire, etc. That's the total liability. And then they look at how much money is actually in the fund right now, after they discount the total liability by present value through all kinds of fund math, and they give you a percentage. Okay? And they say if you're 80% funded, you're fully funded. Anywhere over 80, you're fully funded. Anywhere under 80, you're underfunded. And on that measure, we're not very well funded at all. Okay? Depending on when you ask, we're around 50% funded. And under that measure, you would say, yikes, our pension fund is in trouble. But that is not a measure in any way of the likelihood of your getting the benefits. If you want to know what the likelihood of your getting the benefits is, this is what you got to look at. First of all, you got to look at, are you in a state where the full faith and credit of the state is pledged behind the benefits, or are you in a state where only the pension fund is pledged behind the benefits, right? Who made the promise? The state of Connecticut, in our case, or the fund? If you're in a state where only the fund is on the hook and the fund is underfunded, then you better worry. If you're in a state where the whole state is on the hook, then obviously you worry a lot less. So that's one of the things you look at. Connecticut, the contract is with the state of Connecticut. It is the state of Connecticut that is responsible under the federal constitution to make the payment. So absent the most amazing financial crisis, they are bound by federal law to make the payments. Second thing, if you want to be equally well reassured, when people actually figure out how to buy bonds, how much to pay for bonds, which is a realistic way of judging how safe something is, what they look at is the liability of the pension fund as compared to the earning powers of, or the income powers of the entity that's responsible. Again, if the entity that's responsible is only the fund itself, then that's very limited income power. The state of Connecticut's income powers as compared to other states is actually the highest. We're the wealthiest state in the country. So as far as the security of your payments as a beneficiary, it is Connecticut would come out safer than any other state in the country as compared to less safe. But so, that's, again, I cannot tell you that it is impossible that money will get lost. But by the way, one person asked me this question and said, well, I only want to do this if it's impossible that I could lose my money. So then I said, well, where'd you got your art money? So I don't really know. Is it impossible that wherever you have your art money could go out of business? Should I introduce you to all the people who've lost so much money? And it's like, oh, no, it's not. It's like, so I think nothing's impossible, but the security of the pension fund is not something. I mean, it's an important issue in terms of, for future employees, when you have underfunded pension funds, it's hard to get improvements in benefits. It's hard sometimes to negotiate raises. There's a lot of reasons why it's a bad thing to have underfunded pension funds, but risk that your beneficiaries are going to just not get their payments. For the state of Connecticut, I'll work. So I think you were next, and then there, and then there.
Could you just explain the concept of buying fast service? I'm not really sure what that means.
Sure. People who transfer over, we don't want them to just be treated as new employees, right? We want them to have the opportunity transfer over to the hybrid or the SAG award. We want them to have some recognition that they're not new employees. What we wanted originally, as I said, was for people to be able to transfer over and get past service paid for at the costs that they would have had to pay for it as service employees. We didn't get that. So what you're doing when you buy past service is you're buying past service at what they call the full actuarial cost. If you've been here 20 years, an actuary tells you based on those charts how much they think 20 years of service costs. And you can buy up to 20 years of service depending on how much money you have and want to invest. You can't buy more than 20 years. You've been here 20 years, you can't buy 30 years of service. But you can buy anywhere from 0 to 20 completely at your discretion. There was a fight to make all those things correct, but those things are correct. You can buy anywhere from 0 to 20. And the full actual cost is what the actuary says it costs the fund to provide you the benefits when you retire. Okay? And so in some ways, it's the same thing as if you retire from ARP and buy an annuity. The difference is that when you buy an annuity, you're buying it on the private market.
they make investment assumptions that are designed to make sure that they make a lot of money. So if you took $300,000 in the private market and said, I'd like to buy a life annuity, how much is that going to provide me per month after I retire? And you got a figure, and then you compared it to, I take $300,000, it's 20 years of service at my final average earnings, how much would I get under CSRS? You'll find under CSRS it's way higher. And plus under CSRS you have a cost of living adjustment. That's because the state of Connecticut's not making any money on your, it's breaking even. You're getting all the benefit of the investment interest, in effect, of the state of Connecticut, as compared to you buy a life annuity from those few insurance companies who still sell them. And believe me, Travelers, you buy a life annuity from Travelers, it doesn't give you all the benefit of its earnings.
Is it to your advantage to buy as many years as possible, as allowed, as many years as allowed?
Well, let me sound like Mitt Romney on this one and hedge my bets completely and change my story 6 times. No, never mind. I do have to hedge my bets a little bit, though. I can't sound as bad as Mitt Romney on that, or that can't be as dishonest as Mitt anyway. The question of whether it's to your advantage involves 2 things. One is what you get out of service. And I can tell you that. I mean, I can tell you how to figure it out. And you can go and do the math, and you can say, this is how much I'm going to get per month. All I got to do is estimate what my final average earnings are going to be and how old I'm going to be when I retire. And I can give you a real certainty on that. But then you say to me, okay, it's going to cost me $250,000. Am I better off with the $250,000? I don't know. What are you going to do with the $250,000? If you knew that 32 Black was going to come up in Foxwoods, obviously you're way better off with the $250,000. Put it on 32 Black and you're done. If you go in and ask an investment analyst, they'll tell you what they think $250,000 is worth in terms of producing a lifetime income for you. And if you get a good one and an honest one, and they'll tell you. My personal view, what I would do, I tend to err on what's the purpose of this money. If the purpose of this money is not to make you rich, right? The purpose of this money is to make sure you have a decent, comfortable retirement. The CSRS does that pretty well. It tends to do that pretty well for career employees. So, that's my bias. I tend to think you're probably better off buying past service than having $250,000. But that's it's an individual choice. Talk to an investment talk to somebody good. By the way, I do advise, if you're going to talk to an investment analyst, talk to someone who knows they're not going to get your $250 if you say, because we've had that happen a lot. So make sure whoever you talk to knows they're not going to touch your $250 no matter what they say. Whether they say put it in CSRS or don't, put it in the hybrid or don't. If they understand that, you'll get an honest answer. Ask them how much it would cost to buy a life annuity with that $250,000, and then compare that to what you get under CSRS. I made up the $250, obviously, but you get the point. I think did I say you were next?
Yes, I
And
was
then
wondering,
you're over there.
talk a little bit about when we are vested. And number one. Number two, if you could very briefly repeat the differences between the hybrid and the SAG.
Okay.
Very briefly.
Okay, I can only do it briefly because there's 2 differences. Okay, the hybrid costs you 3% more per year in terms of employee contributions. That's the downside of the hybrid. The hybrid gains you the ability when you leave to get your contributions back plus your employer's contributions back plus 4% interest. So that's the up and that's the down. That's it, really simple. Vesting, there are 2 ways to look at it if you talk about the hybrid as compared to the SAG. Okay, the hybrid has its defined contribution aspect and its defined benefit aspect. In the defined contribution aspect, there is no vesting requirement. Your money is yours always. The employer's money is yours always, and the 4% interest is yours always. So if you go into the hybrid and you decide to leave a week later, you get your money back plus your employer's contributions plus interest for a week, 4% interest for a week. Okay, so no vesting requirements. On the looked at as a defined benefit plan, it has the same vesting rules as CSRS, like all the other benefits are the same, and that's essentially 5 years for current employees. New employees is 10, but it's essentially 5 years. I say over there was next to the name. I hate not knowing anybody's name, but what can I do?
Now, this is a question probably with a fairly obvious answer. If you go into the hybrid plan and stay for 10 years and then decide to get all your money back, it's a one-shot 4% interest. It is no compounding there.
It is
So
compounding.
It's much less than 4%.
No, it is compounding. It is compounding.
Explain that. 4% a year for as long as you keep the money?
Yes. It's a compounded 4% interest.
I'm not certain if it's quarterly. I think we do it quarterly, but it might even be monthly. I don't remember. But it's a compounded interest rate.
So if you stay for 10 years, then
The
it's
money you
more-
put in 10%, the money you put in 10 years ago has been compounded, I think it's quarterly, so it's theoretically been compounded at 1% each quarter for 10 years. That's the money you put in 10 years ago. 9 years ago, obviously, it's for 9 years. The money is not, you don't earn interest on the money until it's in there.
The impression was, and my initial impression was, you take that total amount of money and the state will just simply add 4% to it.
Oh, no,
correct.
that's not correct. That is not
Because
correct.
that's not a good deal.
No, that would not be a good deal. No, it is compounded interest. I just can't remember if it's monthly or quarterly, but it is compounded. Yeah, you were next and then next year. Yes.
Okay. One of the big differences between the SAG award and the hybrid that I remember was that there were two different calculators for purchasing your service. Is that correct? They're significantly different amounts.
It is absolutely correct and completely wrong.
Okay.
Now I do sound like Romney. Now I totally sound like Romney. Jeez. Okay. What you said is absolutely correct. That the calculator that came out for the SAG award is very different than the calculator that came out for the hybrid award.
Significantly higher.
But that's because when the calculator was done for the SAG award, was based upon the pension plan that existed at the time that the SAG award came out. It was never readjusted to take into account any of the changes that took place in 2011. So if the new calculator for the SAG award, if the IRS ever rules in our favor, there'll be a new calculator which will be almost identical to the hybrid calculator. The hybrid calculator will be a tiny bit more expensive, believe it or not. And the reason it's a tiny bit more expensive is that one circumstances that I said, where if you die before you're retirement eligible, then you get all your money back under the hybrid, whereas your beneficiary gets all your money back under the hybrid, whereas under the SAG award you'd only get 5/15. So it makes it's mathematically almost unnoticeable. Like on the scale of you would have to pay 302 to get the hybrid, 302,000 to get the hybrid, and 300 to get the SAG. But essentially they're the same calculator.
Okay.
But the old calculator looks totally different, but just don't use it. That's the problem. It's
Right, and
basically-
that was frightening. The amounts that were coming
Yes.
out of the first calculator were really frightening.
Yes. Well, I mean, look, it's frightening anyway. I mean, I don't want to kid anybody. Actually, the full actual cost is high. It all depends on what you compare it to. It's very high as compared to what you would have paid if you were in service all along. And that's, we didn't win that. It's very low as compared to what you would pay if you were to buy an annuity from the travel. Very, very low. So it just depends on what you compare it to. You were next, and then there's Ian back there.
I don't know if you talked about this, but I haven't heard anything about Tier 3, and I'm wondering for newer employees, in terms of Tier 3 plans, how this might change, like how the calculations are different.
The Tier 3 choice works the same way that all the other choices work. That is, if you're a new employee, you can join the hybrid, you can join SERS, or you can join ARP. Obviously, if you join ARP, you join ARP. If you join SERS, you're going to pay a contribution rate of 2%. And if you join the hybrid equivalent of SERS, you're going to pay a contribution rate of 5%. So your benefits are going to be identical, whether you choose the hybrid or the SERS. You're going to pay 3% more per year in order to be in the hybrid because you have the privilege of taking your money out with interest, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Tier 3 is slightly different than Tier 2A, or we wouldn't have called it Tier 3, right? The difference has to do with the final average earnings are calculated differently. Vesting is 10 years instead of 5 years. It's not a huge difference, but it is a difference. But either way, if you were hired after July 1, or July 1, 2011 or later, those are your three choices. The Tier 3 hybrid formula, Tier 3 formula, or the ARP. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Before I take your question, is there anybody who hasn't spoken yet that I missed? Okay, you go first then.
I just was whispering to my friend here.
Oh, that's cheating.
I have
No
a silly-
whispering.
I have a silly question. When I came here 3 centuries ago, I was told that I had to do
No
the ARP,
feeling.
all right? And I was also told that I didn't have to pay Social Security any